Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're about to get started. We got a ton of people still flooding into the webinar. So grab a cup of coffee or grab some tea, maybe a pencil and pen, or whatever your favorite note-taking device is. And we'll get started here in just a second. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Just to make sure everyone can hear me well as well, please in the chat, if you wouldn't mind putting your location. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from. Super fun to hear people from all around the world that tune in for these events. And it's awesome opportunity to get to know folks. Looks like we got Marcus from Chicago. We got Shamia from New Jersey, Alex from Portland, Lily from Orlando, Justin from Atlanta. We also got Utah, North Virginia, New York, Georgia, Phoenix, San Diego, California, Nashville, North Carolina. For joining us, and really excited. California, awesome. I love the chat in the Q&A because it's an awesome opportunity for you folks to network with other folks as well. We're also live on LinkedIn and YouTube, so feel free to throw in the chat, either your LinkedIn or your location, so that way you can connect. And it's pretty cool, the networking. I've seen that organizations are able to find like-minded organizations that are maybe struggling with the same technology issues, and they can network and pick each other's brain, especially folks that are in the same industry. I've been able to see that a lot, where people that have industry specific questions, they're able to network with other folks and get their questions asked. So thanks everyone for joining us. We're gonna jump right into the presentation. We also got Kansas. Thanks Amber for throwing that in the chat. And we're gonna jump right into the presentation today. So today's presentation is really all around Microsoft 365 and how you can really leverage the whole ecosystem to have everything in one place. And so Microsoft's tools continue to evolve and get better and better since the pandemic. They've had tremendous adoption of tools like Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Cloud PC, SharePoint, OneDrive. We'll get into all of that today, but big picture, if you're a business, if you're an organization, majority of the organizations are utilizing Microsoft 365 these days. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. There's other great platforms like Google and, there's other tools out there, but Microsoft is getting better at simplifying their environment so that you can utilize and leverage the whole ecosystem. So first, a quick introduction. My name is Taylor Wells. I work for Northwest Technologies Group, NW Techs, and we understand IT is hard, but it doesn't have to be. And we help organizations take away the pain and the challenge and the issues with IT so they can grow better, they can be more efficient, they can reduce their risks, and ultimately make more money and be more successful. We have a whole archive of other webinars you can check out at nwtechs.com/webinars, everything on cybersecurity, to password management, to backups, to ransomware, all sorts of different topics that we have a whole archive of on-demand webinars you can check out. And so please do that. We really pride ourselves in having quality information to help organizations like yours and our clients better utilize technology. Our agenda today, we're going to be going through a lot of stuff. So buckle your seatbelt because we're going to be covering a lot of different information. A lot of this is going to be high level, and we'll go into some specific strategies around how to utilize stuff, but we're going to cover things like the benefits of the Microsoft Cloud. We're going to do a comparison of Microsoft 365 to Google. We're going to jump into the world of Microsoft and how it's changing and evolving. We're going to talk about tools like Microsoft Cloud PC, OneDrive, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, how to secure your environment, and then also the future of Microsoft 365. I love Q&A, so we'll have hopefully 10 to 15 minutes towards the end to go over Q&A. And please, as we do this presentation, I want this to be a participatory, if I got that word right, participatory event where you ask questions. And honestly, it helps us create a better presentation the more questions you ask. That feedback, please ask as many questions as you have. We also received hundreds of questions from all of you that registered for this event. And so we'll be integrating some of those questions into the presentation. But as things come up, please ask questions. Kent, I'll answer your question right now. How long is the webinar today? We'll go for about 40 to 45 minutes with kind of the content and the presentation, and then we'll leave room towards the end for Q&A. We will be recording this event, so if you want to share it with your team, or if there's a part that you missed, we'll send out the deck presentation that we'll be reviewing, and also the recording as well. So let's jump right into it. Why the Microsoft Cloud, and why specifically Microsoft 365? So number one, as you're comparing Microsoft to other platforms, 80% of the Fortune 500 companies are on the Microsoft Cloud, and they're utilizing some of the Microsoft Cloud. So if you're an organization that is, maybe you still have on-premise servers, maybe you still have on-premise, meaning, they're in your office or in your closet or whatnot, or your server room, or maybe you're storing stuff locally and you're like, you know what, I don't want to move to the cloud. I have fears about, security. I have questions about the scalability, the cost, all that fun stuff. And those are all great questions. And we'll try to cover some of those today. But ultimately, the Microsoft Cloud is trusted by, approximately 400 of the Fortune 500 companies to some extent. And when you look at from a security standpoint, which is actually our next point here, and improves security and enables compliance, there is something that feels good about having, your cash underneath your pillow, right? Or having your data in physically that you can, hold a hard drive, right? There's something that feels more secure about that. But if you look at any of the studies, look at any of the trends, ultimately the cloud has the ability to be much more secure. And honestly, none of your data is just right in your, in your physical location, right? If you're connected to the internet, or if you're working remotely and people are logging in, your data isn't just locally, right? You're not accessing it remotely. Data is being transferred over the internet. So chances are, if you do have all your data stored locally, it probably isn't actually. You're probably using the internet. You're using the cloud to some degree to ultimately transfer data, to store data, to use the data, right? Even in transit, even if it's backed up locally and stored locally, you're accessing it through the internet by some means. So if you're doing that, that raises a huge security risk. And that's why you've probably had to use VPNs, if you're familiar with that, or, your IT provider, your MSP, or whoever your folks are ultimately, recommending that you do all these other security measures, because it's a huge security risk. If you are storing stuff locally and you're accessing it remotely, huge security risk. So if you move everything into the cloud, right? Let's say you moved all your files, your emails, all of your stuff into the cloud, let's say into Microsoft 365, for example, you're going to improve your ability to keep it secure. And we're not going to have time today to go into all those reasons, but if you are curious what those reasons are, feel free to reach out to us and we can have a longer conversation around that. But ultimately, it also increases compliance as well. It gives you the ability to demonstrate compliance easier and better. So if you are a financial firm, a healthcare organization, a law firm, a accounting firm, or any regulated industry, HIPAA, FINRA, SEC, have any sort of, or any state regulations, right? If you're in the state of California, they have cybersecurity compliance. Even organizations like marketing firms are now coming under a lot of cybersecurity compliance regulations where they have to have specific things in place. So if that applies to you, demonstrating that compliance is super important. The cloud will help you do that better. Believe it or not, it also helps you reduce costs. So moving to the cloud, if we talk about server maintenance or hard drive maintenance, okay, so if you're a company, if you have an IT manager or an MSP, most small, medium-sized firms have one or both of those things. That an MSP, managed service provider, those are folks like us, NW Techs, that help organizations manage all their IT. Or you have an IT person on staff. If you go ask them right now, what's the most complex part of your infrastructure, they will tell you your servers. Like, it's the number one hardest thing to maintain. It's the number one hardest thing to keep secure. It's the number one hardest thing to keep stable is servers. So moving away from servers, if you are under 1,000 employees, or even under 500 employees, let's say, chances are there's probably not a whole lot of good reasons to have servers in place. There is some exceptions to that, but I've been with this company for 5 years and worked with hundreds of organizations and never have 95% of the time, there's no good reason to have a server in this day and age. And the cost of maintaining a server, the cost of maintaining is so costly. And then also the stability of it. If your power goes out, or if your internet goes out, or if you forget to patch it or update it, ultimately you are, the chances are it's super, you'll have downtime, right? So if the server goes down, your email goes down, or you can't access your files or whatever your tools are, if you can move those to the cloud, then you just have a much more stable environment. And even the subscription of the cloud, if you amortize the cost of paying for a server to have your IT folks maintain it, the cost of disruption and lack of effective performance, right? Where, like I mentioned, if the internet sputters, or if your power goes out, or I had a story where somebody did construction on a road where they had to do some drilling. The power went out, or the internet went out, and they were out for like 2 weeks, and their server was down, and they were basically fish out of water and had no ability to function in their organization. So moving that risk to the cloud is tremendous. It also simplifies your IT management. So like I said, if you ask your MSP, or if you ask your IT manager, chances are, it's the most complex. So simplifying is great. If you want to scale, if you want to open up another office, or if you want to grow more, scaling servers is hard. You have to buy more equipment. You have to make sure they're connected. You have to create different links if you have different locations. It simplifies it greatly by moving to the cloud. Number one, and then the last one, at least, promotes agility and keeps you current. Every 5 years you have to update that server, right? Or update software. The cloud, very nebulous concept, but once you're in the cloud, it's much easier to move to different platforms. Let's say 5 years down the road, Microsoft isn't the best cloud platform. Maybe Google has surpassed them. Then you can much easily transition to another cloud provider than you can from server to server. Hope that makes sense. So Microsoft Cloud in particular, and we're talking about, I'm kind of diving deep into the cloud because I think this is really important. And I know through this conversation, a lot of folks are wondering, hey, how can I simplify? How can I move away from servers? How can I move everything to the cloud? And the Microsoft Cloud in particular is a great option, but the cloud in general is also a phenomenal option. So if you have loyalties to Google, move your environment to Google, right? We are a Microsoft partner and a Google partner. So we have clients that use, one or the other. And so there's good reasons to use Google, but there's also phenomenal, and we'll talk about Google in a little second here. But Microsoft in general is a great cloud provider. Either way, if you're a small organization, move to the cloud. There is a tremendous upside in so many regards, and there's very little reason to stay on premise. So I hope that's helpful. If you need more help on why the cloud, feel free to reach out to us and happy to help you more. So ultimately, the next slide I want to focus on is the Microsoft 365 versus Google. So hinting at this, so why Microsoft versus Google? Well, first of all, Microsoft, number one, is from our standpoint, has the ability to have a little more security in place. You're able to lock things down. Google, they're kind of always neck and neck, and they're always ultimately, a very competitive environment, and they're both dominant players in this space when it comes to email, file storage, calendar, team collaboration, cloud computing, all that fun stuff. But from what you've seen, the ability to manage security and also compliance is much easier in the Microsoft space. Let me rephrase that. You have much more capabilities, and you can get much more granular when it comes to security permissions and things like that. So if you're in a regulated industry, or if you deal with a lot of sensitive data, super important to have that secure and locked down. Another reason is Microsoft Teams. We love Microsoft Teams. It's definitely the leader when it comes to team collaboration tools. We'll have a presentation on Teams in a little bit and dive into some nitty gritties of some cool parts about Teams. But there really isn't. Teams is exponentially better than Google Hangouts or Google Meets or whatever they're calling it these days. It's also, in my opinion, better than Slack. It's more comprehensive. It can do more things than Slack. So when you're looking at a team collaboration tool, Teams is just a leader in this space. And so definitely, you can't get, using Teams and Google doesn't make sense. So you kind of standardize on Microsoft 365 to use Teams. One of the negatives of Microsoft is the setup and management are not as user-friendly as Google. So honestly, I have a sweet spot for Google in a lot of ways. I love their email. Gmail is like, probably in my opinion, is the best email platform out there. It's so robust. It has so many cool features. It just works super well. And that's actually indicative of their entire ecosystem. Google is very intuitive. Their Google Drive is an awesome, their search capabilities are phenomenal. And Google gets search, right? And they just have a lot of cool, their search capabilities are so powerful. To find a document or find an email in your email is pretty amazing, and they do such a good job of it. So there's some positives to Google, right? And if you're using Google products now, then there is maybe some good reasons to stay there. But overall, the Microsoft ecosystem, Teams being one of them, the security and compliance, and then Microsoft just seems to be kind of one step ahead of Google when it comes to the overall ecosystem. Not as easy to set up, maybe not as user-friendly at times, but if you have the right Microsoft partner like us, or if you have one in place already, awesome, lean on them, help them make sure you set it up correctly, make sure you set up the environment correctly. Before I move on, I want to make sure I hit on the fact that a lot of times I talk to organizations that are using both. So they love Gmail, but they also love OneDrive or SharePoint or Teams. And I got to say that it is really not best practice to try to use both platforms. They do not talk well together. It's like Android and iOS or Android, iPhones and Android. They don't really talk together. It's the same way with Google and Microsoft. Their products are very different. Just like you can't open an Excel file in Google Sheets, right? It doesn't do it. It's the format gets all messed up, and vice versa. So one big takeaway here for you is ultimately standardize on one or the other. Whether go all in with Google or go all in with Microsoft, and there's business cases for both. And depending on your organization, standardize on one or the other. Don't try to use both. I had a couple calls in the past couple of weeks where we've had organizations that were trying to do both, or haphazardly had just gotten to this place where they're using both, and very problematic. They're experiencing a lot of issues with doing that. So standardize on Google or Microsoft, and ultimately there's a lot of 80% of the clients we work with use Microsoft, and about 20% of them use Google. So there is a case for using Google, but generally speaking, Microsoft is the way to go. Our next section we're going to kind of dive into is the world of Microsoft. So the world of Microsoft, as you can see, looks very confusing. And like I mentioned earlier, they're not always the most user-friendly and not always simplistic. So Microsoft is moving, you'll probably notice they're changing their terminology. Office 365 terms are changing, and they're called Microsoft 365 now. And the reason why is Microsoft is expanding into other areas outside of Office products. So you can probably, it's hard to see here, but on all the details, but they're adding a lot more features as it relates to security, kind of endpoint management. Endpoint management means the actual workstation. How do we protect the actual workstation, your laptops, your desktops, your iPhones, and your smartphones? So they're providing a bunch of security and tools in that way. And then they're also just expanding. You'll see they're also expanding their licenses. And now they have 8 different licenses versus the 4 they had before. So I don't want to overwhelm you with all these details. You don't even need to read through this. Reach out to a Microsoft partner like us, or the one you already have in place, to find out the subscription you need. Big takeaway here is the terminology is changing. They're getting into more areas outside of just the traditional Excel, Word, PowerPoint, SharePoint, OneDrive, those tools, the Office tools, and they're expanding into other areas. Okay, this next section is probably my favorite section of the whole presentation. And the reason why is it's pretty cool what Microsoft is investing in, and a lot of providers are investing in. So you probably have heard the term Azure and maybe Microsoft Cloud PC. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes explaining to the best of my ability how I understand these tools. I'm not an engineer by trade. I am a user, a technology user just like you. I care about the outcomes. So how I see these outcomes are what Microsoft is doing. So right now, you may have a server, right, that has, let's say, a practice management tool on there, or QuickBooks, or a specific tool that you have to have installed on a server or a workstation, right? You can't have it in the cloud. It's not like you can't go to www.whatever website to access it. You have to access it what we call locally on a workstation or on a server. So what Microsoft is doing and other solutions is that they're able to take those tools and put them in the cloud, tools that you had to have locally, and put them in the cloud. And now people can access them anywhere on any tool. And they're actually going one step further where your actual, that's level number one, right? So just think about all the tools that you're like, oh, I have to have a server for this. There's no cloud version of it. Or I have to have it installed on my workstation. There's no cloud version of it. That's not a reality anymore. You can actually move those tools to the cloud and access them in the cloud through Azure and Virtual Desktop and other tools there. Microsoft Cloud PC takes it one step further. And this is like my most favorite. This is like the coolest tool that in technology that's come out, where instead of you accessing the cloud, when you're on your workstation, you're actually logging into a virtual machine. That's only your machine in the cloud. So what that means is nothing is stored locally. Anything on your workstation, there's no data on your workstation. There is no data stored on your workstation. There's no data anywhere locally. It's all in the cloud. So when you type in your password, you are actually logging into your computer that's in the cloud. Now, I know I'm getting really meta and I don't want to get too much of the weeds here, but the impact is something called, you can create a zero trust environment. What a zero trust environment means is you don't actually care about the security on that local workstation. It doesn't matter how secure your workstation is. It doesn't matter if it's backed up. It doesn't matter, to assert all things being equal, that it's because it's a zero trust environment. If you Google zero trust, you can learn about it. And this is zero trust environments is the way of the future. It's really hard to protect an environment. It's really hard to lock down an environment. We've seen with all the cybersecurity breaches, and it's really hard even for large organizations to keep criminals out. So what organizations are moving to is a zero trust environment where we are creating environments that don't need to be secure because nothing is stored there. So to make a long story short, and the impacts are Azure and Cloud PC are the way of the future in regards to creating hyper secure environments, hyper scalable environments, right? Because you don't need anything to be stored locally. You don't need, so for example, if one of your employees leaves the company, well, you don't need their laptop back. You don't need any of the data on their laptop. You do want their laptop back, obviously, so you can give it to somebody else, but you're not really worried about that data being transferred because all the data is in the cloud, and you just transfer that Cloud PC user to another, give somebody else access to it, right? And they can access it from anywhere in the world, any workstation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that, first of all, number one, I know I'm getting to the weeds of this particular area, but this is super cool and can solve a lot of the complex technology problems you may are experiencing, right? Like how do we move away from any sort of local servers, and I mentioned earlier that there's about 5% of the companies we work with that still need a server. This is a solution to solve those 5%. So really every company we work with, we have a solution for moving you away from on-premise servers, moving you away from on-premise equipment and storing stuff locally. Better performance, better security, better scalability, and ultimately a more stable environment. So super cool stuff. Please reach out to us if you have more questions about this or how maybe you can utilize some of these technology tools. We're seeing some really great success in this area. Next section I want to go over is the power of SharePoint and also OneDrive. So let's talk about file storage for a second here. And this is where SharePoint and OneDrive come in. File storage is ultimately an ongoing problem we see with a lot of organizations. There's device proliferation. So there's files everywhere, right? There's cloud storage proliferation, right? So maybe you're using Google Drive and you're using Dropbox, or maybe using OneDrive and Dropbox. So what we encourage organizations is, standardize, focus on a couple tools, use them really well, make sure you utilize them really well, because if you're not careful, you're going to have data living everywhere. You're going to have data living on different devices and whatnot. So this is where SharePoint and OneDrive come in, where you can ultimately use them to store all of your data, files, and then also interact with your clients. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a second here. But what's really important is ultimately storing your data in a place that can be backed up well, storing your data in a place that you can easily share it. And I want to talk about that for a second, because what we also see is a lot of bad practice of emailing files back and forth or emailing sensitive data. That is really dangerous and not a best practice for any organization. You should never email something, a file or any text, even in the email, that's sensitive. PII, personal identifiable information, if you've heard that term. So addresses, phone numbers, email, social security numbers, bank accounts, any sort of confidential information. If you're a law firm, by definition, you have a bunch of confidential information, even in the text messages, or excuse me, the emails you're exchanging back and forth. If you want to look at the gold standard for file storage or for sharing any sort of information, look at banks. You'll never get an email from a bank with a file attached to the email. At least you won't for any major bank. Maybe if it's a small regional bank, they're still doing some legacy processes, for lack of a better expression. If you look at any major bank, you will have to log into a portal to access that file or to access that email. The reason for that is email is not secure. I repeat, email is not secure. Even if you encrypt your email, which you can add on encryption on top of your email, there's no guarantee that your client or your customer isn't going to return an email to you with sensitive data, right? And they may not have their email encrypted. So there's really the only effective way to store information is to store it in a secure vault, where you and the client or your partners or whoever accessing that information have to log in and identify and authenticate themselves. And hopefully you have MFA and multi-factor authentication on top of that as well. So how does SharePoint and OneDrive come into this? So first of all, SharePoint is a very robust platform, and it does more than just file storage. You can have internal calendars, voting, critical websites. You can have business processes. You can have an intranet, which is like a internal Wikipedia, if you would, or internal encyclopedia of your organization. You can store documents, kind of like we're talking about right now. You can collaborate. It does all these crazy things. But 90% of the clients, 95% of the clients we work with, we use it primarily for these two things, which is collaboration and document sharing. And SharePoint, how we view the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive is SharePoint is phenomenal for internal document collaboration, whereas OneDrive is a little bit easier for external. You can use SharePoint for both, but OneDrive seems to be a little more intuitive for external communication. So depending on your organization and how you're set up and how you interact with your clients or customers, maybe you don't have a whole lot of interaction with clients or customers, so you don't have that two-way sync, or you need a secure vault to have all that data in there. So ultimately, SharePoint is great for the internal. OneDrive is great for external. Here's an example of our partner Pax8 that how they use SharePoint. So they're a larger organization. If you're under 250 employees and you're a small to medium-sized business, you'll use SharePoint for those two things, collaboration and document storage. But it can do all these other things. You can do, have brand assets. You can have conference rooms. You can do calendar. You can have kind of that internal HR and processes and cool stuff like that. Kind of the difference between OneDrive is originally they structured OneDrive, and I think they're moving away from this. And this is where Microsoft, they tend to sometimes overcomplicate things. You can do so much with it, and it really is, in our opinion, the best platform when it comes to all these tools. But sometimes, they get a little bit ahead of themselves or a little bit overcomplicate things. And that's why Microsoft, if you ever try to call them for support, they'll probably tell you to find a Microsoft partner, or if you have an IT provider, it's hard to get for support from them because there is so many things they can do. And it really is industry specific and company specific. But OneDrive, I love using OneDrive for external communication. So if I'm collaborating with a client, or if I have a third-party vendor that I'm sharing documents with and I need a secure vault to do that in, OneDrive is great. This is one way you can use OneDrive to ultimately share documents. And this is kind of the breakdown of how you can share documents, right? So excuse me, there is a link setting. So if you were to open up a folder or open up a document, this is how you can share. And it gives you a bunch of different options. You can just share anyone with a link. You can only have folks internally, right? NW, Northwest Technologies Group, that's us. You can give what people have access. You can send it to specific people. You can have all sorts of, you can allow them to edit. You can set a password, all sorts of fun stuff. And the reason why I share this is because, first of all, you want to create a process for how to share things securely with your clients and externally, have a secure vault. And what we do is I only share things with specific people. And what it does is, so if I were to share a folder or a document with a client, it will send them an email asking them to log into OneDrive to access a file. So this, like I said earlier, you want to have folks authenticate themselves, right? You want to have folks log in with a password and email and multi-factor authentication. You might be asking, well, what if they don't have a Microsoft 365 subscription? What if they use Google? Or what if they're in Gmail? Or what if they don't have any of those things? Great question. The answer to that is, number one, you can sign up for a free license of Microsoft, and you can access it just like you can with Google and any of the other providers. You can access it for free. And then a lot of the times your clients use Microsoft 365. So they already have a login because they're using it already. So that's kind of the answer, the authentication part, right? How do people log in and access the files? But this is the gold standard. This is the best practice. You want to have a secure vault where people log in with a password and email and hopefully MFA, multi-factor authentication. That's that annoying text message code you get when you log into your bank or whatnot. It's annoying, but it's exponentially important. As a side note, Google came out and said they were able to reduce 60% of breaches of accounts with MFA enabled. 60%. It's a huge number, right? You're able to reduce potential breaches with MFA. So super important to have that enabled. So yeah, ultimately the gold standard is create a secure vault. OneDrive is great for this. SharePoint can also do this as well, depending on how you utilize them and what your needs are. Big picture though is ultimately creating that secure vault. The one thing I also love about OneDrive and SharePoint is you can edit Excel, Word, PowerPoint documents in the cloud in real time and have asynchronous collaboration, right? And they work super well. I don't even like using the desktop versions of those tools anymore because their cloud versions have gotten so well, and I can collaborate with clients, I can collaborate with team members in the cloud in real time, right? Huge advantage than trying to store things locally or storing it on a server, and you have multiple versions of documents and you can't restore to an original version, and you can't leave comments or collaborate super well with other folks on it. So a lot of advantages, and if you use Excel, PowerPoint, Word, having it in OneDrive or SharePoint is awesome, and you'll have a great experience with collaboration and utilizing those tools in the cloud. Awesome. Next transition, before we jump into the next section, we're going to jump into Teams. I want to let you know, if you have more questions about Microsoft 365 and you need help, you don't have an MSP like us that's helping you manage your Microsoft 365 environment, head over to nwtex.com/Microsoft 365. You can book a free call with us, no obligation. You can spend 30 minutes with us asking your questions about your specific uses of Microsoft 365, and we can see if we can help you with them. And we've done some amazing work in the past couple of years with clients utilizing Microsoft 365, and we'd love to talk to you if you're looking for more help. Cool. Next section is Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams is, before I jump into it, what is Microsoft Teams? If you're not already utilizing it, Microsoft Teams is a collaboration platform. And these are rather new, in the past probably 5 years have gained a lot of popularity, 5 to 10 years. And what they are is it's a platform where you can have instant communication with other folks on your team or even outside your organization without having to send an email, without having to have a phone call. So a common parallel or similar tool is texting, right? If you text somebody, it's instant, right? Or years ago, instant messaging, right? Where you had that instant chat. Teams at its base tool is a instant messenger platform. You can instantly communicate with folks and solve questions easily, save time on meetings, save time on decisions to outcomes, right? Or time to decision process. How quickly do you make decisions? And then it also does a bunch of other things too. Teams can also ultimately use, you can do things like video conferencing, you can do webinars, you can do all sorts of things. I see a question, Larry, which I'll totally address right now. Why are we not using Teams right now for this webinar? And that's a great question. For me personally, webinars, the webinar function in Teams is not quite as robust as Zoom. It's actually about there. So probably in the next couple of months, we'll be transitioning from Zoom webinar to Teams webinar. Teams webinar function is about a year old. So Zoom has just dialed it in so well that their webinar is just flawless in so many ways and found a ton of value in it. That being said, the rest of their tools like Microsoft, like the video conferencing or having meetings and stuff like that, they're about as good as Zoom. So Teams can replace your Slack, right? If you're using Slack, it can replace Zoom. And it can be kind of Zoom and Slack combined, right? So you have that instant messaging, but you also have that video conferencing. You can call folks, you can have meetings, and lots of cool features there. So this is kind of the outline of, this is an example of Teams. And you have things like, you have your activity, you have chats, you have teams within Teams. Once again, Microsoft, God bless them, but they, teams within teams. But basically what it is you can break out different organizations within your organization, right? So you don't want everyone on accounting to view what's everyone in marketing, right? Or everyone that's in customer service. You don't want to necessarily have them see what's everyone that's in marketing or accounting. So you can break them out into different teams and have folks on just individual channels and individual breakdowns of that. You can also do file collaboration, right? So you can open up a SharePoint document in Teams and collaborate on that in a meeting with somebody else. Super cool, right? So you can open up an Excel, Word, or PowerPoint document or even a PDF and review it in Teams in a meeting with folks, and it's hosted in the cloud, right? And it's connected to SharePoint and OneDrive. Some of the other benefits, I've already hinted at some of these things. These are some stats that Microsoft came out with. Actually in 2020, there was about 10 years of innovation with Teams because of the pandemic. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is technology adoption. Teams is one of those tools that's just, if you've used it over the past couple of years, you've seen how fast they've changed and how they've added so many features and made it a pretty phenomenal platform. So 4 hours saved by information workers through collaboration, set almost 18% improvement of time decisions made by decision makers. That's one of my favorites, 18% improvement. So in the remote world, we hire folks remotely, we service our clients remotely, and we've been able to hire folks so quickly because of Teams. So for example, what we do is we interview somebody, we record the meeting, generally speaking, we take that recording and we share it with everyone or share it with the hiring managers or folks in their department in Teams so people can watch it. We've been able to, from the initial interview, been able to hire somebody within a few days because of Teams. Just think about that for a second. Usually with hiring folks, you'd have to do it, take weeks or months to hire somebody. But because of Teams and the quickness with the ability to share information, record meetings, and also the remote world we're living in, right? I don't want to disregard that fact. People are much more open to communicating over conferencing and phone calls and things like that. So pretty cool outcome and benefit of Teams. And almost 90% of survey respondents felt having all their solutions in one place saved time. 19% reductions in meetings each week. I love that. I think meetings are super important, right? Collaboration, synergy, culture, all those things are benefits of meeting and having a meeting. But not all things need to be a meeting. Not all things need to be a phone call. If you can just message somebody real quick and get an answer to a problem, you may be able to save a meeting. And then once again, back to the original kind of top of the issue, you'll save time, you'll make quicker decisions. These two things are in parallel. If you can make quicker decisions, you don't need to have as many meetings. 45 minutes per week were saved by first-line workers, 150 trips on average, right? You don't have to travel as much. Some great benefits. Let's talk about some features of Teams here. One of my favorite features, and I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly because we have some other things I want to address before we wrap up here and make sure we get to any questions you have. You can refresh. You can search for different messages. I do this all the time. I'm like, oh, I had that conversation with my boss 6 months ago, or somebody shared some information with me, a file or some text. Let me go search for it. Super cool feature. You can have taggings. You can tag a group. You can tag an individual. You can tag a team, right? And be like, hey, everyone, attention, please focus on this issue. You can, I like the most recent functions, so you can see, what's the most important, right? If whatever's at the top or whoever came in the most recent communication. Also things like file sharing. I mentioned this. You can have you can integrate SharePoint into Teams, so you can have your files there. You can open them up in Teams and then ask somebody to join a meeting and review the document with you. They're continuing to add tons of apps. So depending on your apps and what you're using, right? If you have a project management tool you're using or whatever, you can integrate those with Teams and open those up. I will say that there's a phone function in Teams, and we get this a lot, is that their phone function isn't great. Their calling feature is super expensive. It's not a professional, comprehensive PBX phone system that you may be used to with a VoIP provider or a traditional phone system. They're not quite there, but you can integrate, RingCentral or other phone systems to Teams and have your phone system integrated with it as well. So cool stuff there. So some of the other tools here, these are features I would recommend enabling in Teams, and there's a lot of them here. But I'm not gonna go through all these because it'll take too much time. But ultimately, these are all great features that if you're setting up your Teams and you're setting up your SharePoint and your whole environment, these are things you should have in place. So direct messages, group chats, rename chat, savings, pin chats. Other things too, collaborations. You want to create team sites, channels, file sharing, in-document collaboration. You want to be able to enable apps, enable built-in culture stuff like GIFs and stuff like that, so people can have some humor in their day-to-day. Collaboration, like I mentioned, you can integrate the phone feature. So the phone feature, you can make phone calls. An audio-only meeting is basically what it is. No problem. But that's only from Teams to Teams. So it's not like I can call a cell phone through Teams and that done well. But they're getting better, and maybe one day Teams calling will be as well as a traditional phone system. We still use a traditional phone system internally, a traditional VoIP phone system, right? Like RingCentral or Vonage or any of those providers. We have our own that we use and we support our clients and we love, and we kind of use it in tandem with Teams. Some other cool features here. So this is when you're in a meeting and there's this bar up here and there's a ton of features. I want to highlight these three little dots. So when you're in a meeting, click on those three little dots. And well, first of all, before I get into the three little dots, the next one is cool features like raising your hand. I love that in meetings where you can just click that and it gives you a virtual hand raise. You can do this in Zoom as well, and super helpful for not having to interrupt, right? Somebody talking, because interrupting is harder to interrupt virtually than it is in person. So that's a great feature to be able to keep a fluid back and forth and give people the opportunity to speak, and also equity, right, across the whole organization, where people don't, the people that are not the most aggressive can still talk, right, and still have an opportunity to speak. If you click on the three little dots when you're in a meeting, it brings down this pop-up where there's all these different features, and one is the different modes that you can view a meeting. So the gallery mode is this view right, or excuse me, the gallery mode is the most traditional. And what that is basically you get everyone, there's basically boxes of everyone. And sometimes that's kind of overwhelming, right? You have like everyone's background and there's a lot going on. Another version is together mode. And this is something exclusive to Microsoft Teams. I haven't seen any other platform that has done this, where it takes out their background and just puts basically the head of the person and upper body in a seat. So there's no background, there's no pictures in the background or distractions, and it simplifies the environment. I really like this. This big of a meeting, I don't know if I'd do together mode with this big of a meeting because it's a lot of people, but if there's 10 or 15 people, together mode works really well. This is actually my favorite view when, this is one of my favorite views when it comes to meetings and gallery mode and whatnot, is you're able to just have whoever the speaker is, have their feed going, and then they'll have other people pop up. Here's another version of it where you have the presentation, the speaker, and then other folks. Here is the large gallery mode, which just gets a little overwhelming for me. And just, too many people, too many faces trying to who to look at. But this is also an option too. They have this for up to 50 folks where you can have 50 cameras there. A couple of other features, if you drop down there, you can click on meeting details and it'll pop up this ability to share quickly the meeting invite. Really, that's super cool to be able to just like, hey, you start a meeting, copy the details, text it, email it, or maybe message somebody and invite them to the meeting. Another cool feature I love is stop incoming camera. So this is a cool feature that I'm sure you've been in a meeting where somebody's internet sputtered, right? Or whatnot. I always recommend if you're having internet issues, just turn off incoming cameras and your camera as well. So Zoom, I believe, just released a similar feature as well. But very cool feature to be able to basically just turn it into an audio only meeting, right? Where there's no video feed, and makes it super simple and super effective to eliminate the internet issues, right? And continue the collaboration. People are like, oh, let's just try to make it work with the video on. I'm like, nope, let's go straight to audio. I miss phone calls. So I actually appreciate sometimes to have video off, and it will solve your internet issues. A lot of times if you're having internet issues or reliability issues over video, just turn off incoming video. That will turn off everyone's video coming into you, and then just turn off your video right up here by just turning off your camera, and that will be solved. Awesome. Before we jump into the Q&A, we got a couple more sections here. One more reminder as well, if you have technology problems or Microsoft 365, you want more help, please reach out to us. The link's in the chat, nwtex.com/Microsoft 365 to book a meeting right now with us for 30 minutes, and we can help you see if we can knock out some of your IT issues and or your Microsoft 365 issues. So the next section I want to talk about is secure your Microsoft environment. So here's some things to think about when you're looking at your Microsoft environment. If you have a Microsoft partner or an MSP or an IT manager, here are the things you should go back to them and be like, these are the things you want to have in place. Number one, you should have MFA enabled across your entire Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So it should be enabled and enforced. And I'm going to clarify the difference there. Enabled means people can turn it on if they want to. Enforce means it's required to have it in place. The reason why you want to enforce is not everyone's going to turn it on, right? They may forget, they may not, they may hate the text message codes and they don't want to deal with that and deal with that extra level of security. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to avoid a breach, MFA is like the number one thing you should do to have in place. In addition to having secure passwords and all sorts of other things, MFA, it's a deal breaker. It's actually so much of a deal breaker for us that we don't work with organizations that are not willing to have that enabled and enforced across their entire environment. We don't want to work with organizations that don't take a serious approach to cybersecurity and breaches, and MFA is the kind of the number one step in that direction. Another thing is only share secure files. So what we mean by that and secure folders is, you're not emailing things through Outlook. That's a sensitive data, right? Like we talked about earlier, create that secure vault that folks have to log in and log out of to access that data. back up your emails and file storage. So if you read the little terms and conditions of Microsoft or Google or really any cloud provider, they recommend that you back up your emails, your files, your calendar, your entire environment. The reason for that is ultimately, if you were to accidentally delete something, they can't guarantee it. Microsoft, Google, they all guarantee they won't lose your data. But ultimately, if you were to accidentally delete something, right? Or if you were to accidentally, or maliciously delete something, if an employee, tries to steal data and God forbid they delete it on their way out, you will not have a backup of that. Google, Microsoft, none of them guarantees that after a certain period of time, I believe it's 60 or 90 days, that information's gone and you're not going to get it. So backing up your email, backing up your files are super important. You're probably used to backing up your workstation. If your data is now living in the cloud, it's now important to back up the cloud. Also monitor for suspicious activity. A little anecdotal story. I had one of our engineers, Kevin, reach out to me maybe 6 months ago and was like, "Hey, Taylor, are you in Eastern Europe right now?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm not in Eastern Europe right now. Why?" And he's like, "Somebody's trying to access your email in Eastern Europe." So we were able, because of that, we were able to lock down my account, put additional security measures in place for my account in particular to make sure we didn't have a breach. That's the type of proactive things we do for our clients. We do for internally and for our clients to make sure that not only do you have the right security features in place, right? MFA, sharing securely, having the backups in place, but also ongoing monitoring to make sure your environment is secure and any suspicious activity comes up to the surface and we can address it before, God forbid, there was a breach. The future of Microsoft. So a couple other notes here we talked about, and like we mentioned, Microsoft is focused on the 365 environment. It's going to include all the Office tools. They're focused on security. It's going to start coming standard with their OS systems and a lot of device management. And then ultimately some of the security things they're putting in place, like safe attachments, spoof intelligence, safe links, Windows Defender, Exploit Guard. These are some cool advanced threat protection features that are coming into place. Lots of exciting stuff that we're looking forward to. So we have a few more minutes before the end of the hour, and I'd love to have any questions. I'm going to start diving into these questions. Please submit them, whatever questions you have, Microsoft 365, and IT questions that are related, please share them. So Joni asks, you can integrate SharePoint and Teams. What about OneDrive documents? That's a great question. And at this time, I'm actually not sure if you can integrate OneDrive documents into Teams well. That's a great question. And if you want more information, please reach out and we can have one of our engineers look at that. And we can definitely look into that for you. Looks like another question is, can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, we'll send out a recording and the whole deck as well after this, so you can have that and share it with your team. Vicky asks, if you are meetings with clients, do they all need Microsoft 365 to participate? Vicky, great question. And yes, if you're using Teams or with clients, they'll need a Microsoft login. That's not the same thing as a subscription. You can get a login of Teams for free. There's no cost to it. So there's no cost to it. They don't need a Microsoft license like the ones you may be paying for. They just need to have a login, which you can register for free at Microsoft.com. Let's see here. Melissa, great questions coming in. Thanks for adding them. Please continue to come in. Melissa asked, there's a 30-day recovery for SharePoint. Been there, had to recover documents. Melissa, I'm so sorry you had to be there. That's frustrating. And so yeah, you have a 30-day, right? So 6 months down the road, you accidentally deleted something, it's gone, right? Or 31 days beyond that, it's gone. So super, 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 super important. Back up your emails, back up your files, back up your whole cloud environment. It looks like somebody asked, is it possible to integrate Teams in RingCentral? Yes, great question. It does. They have a decent integration. And from what I've seen with RingCentral, it's not perfect. And they have a couple different options. It's a little bit expensive, but it does a lot. And it's the best integration for a VoIP phone system that I've seen is the RingCentral Teams integration. And RingCentral is a VoIP provider. VoIP is a phone system, if anybody's curious about that. Melissa also asks, we had some issues with computers not able to handle the multiple instances of Teams on their computers. Takes up too many resources. The multiple instances of Teams, interesting. That's a good question, Melissa. I have not seen that personally. I would say reach out to us and we can dive deep into that problem. That seems very unusual that Teams would bog down. If you have multiple organizations, like multiple companies that people are working for, and there's like 4 different companies and there's a lot going on, maybe that's the situation, but that's very unusual. There's probably something wrong with the workstation or something's configuration that's set up incorrectly that would solve that issue. Another person asked, will be a copy of the webinar? Yep, there'll be a webinar. We'll send out a recording of the webinar. Haley asks, how easy is it to transition to Outlook from Gmail? Will we lose all our current data on Gmail? Great question, Haley. It is somewhat complicated, but we do it all day, every day. We've done, just talking to somebody yesterday about doing the same thing. So moving from Google to Microsoft, I should have answered that question earlier, is a project. It takes some time. I would not recommend you trying to figure it out on your own unless you have a strong IT background, but it's not, it's not a $50,000 problem. It's a couple $1,000 problem or a $5,000 problem or a $10,000 problem, depending on how big your organization is. It's not a huge project to move you from Google to Microsoft, but that being said, I wouldn't go Google it. No pun intended. I wouldn't go Google it to figure it out on your own. Elon says, can you please expand on the call option versus Microsoft? So the call option, so what we're talking about here is Teams has the ability to integrate phone system. So they have their own phone system, which I crossed that off the list. I don't like their phone system. It's not robust enough. It's super expensive. The other options are you can integrate a phone system like RingCentral. That's the number one integration I would recommend is if you use RingCentral, we're actually a RingCentral partner as well. So we can help you, set up Microsoft 365 and get you connected with RingCentral if you want to use both of those tools. And you can integrate RingCentral into Teams, and you can have that be listed in your apps in Teams, and then you use the functionality there. So yeah, that would be the answer. So yeah, and then you expand on the question. You referred to Teams call option, which is not great. Any alternatives from Microsoft? So yeah, RingCentral is great. We also have our own VoIP system. So we use Microsoft Teams, but then we also have an outside phone system that's actually not integrated with Teams. And we're fine with that. It works really well having our VoIP phone system outside of Teams, and then our Teams is for specific reasons. Happy to dive deep into that and help you navigate how to set up a phone system and Teams and make sure those things are working well together. R asked, do you have any best practices to share in migrating file storage platforms into SharePoint? The best practice is to find somebody that knows that's a Microsoft partner, moving your files over, setting up the hierarchy, setting up the sharing permissions. Once again, it's not rocket science, but you want to have somebody that knows the SharePoint environment to do it. And then, yeah, there's not just files too. It's your email, right? If your email is not in Microsoft 365, that's probably more problematic than file storage. Moving your files from Dropbox to SharePoint or Box or Google Drive to SharePoint, that's not the biggest problem. It's actually moving your email into Microsoft 365. That is extremely problematic. We do all of it. So we can help you with all of it. If you're trying to migrate from Microsoft or move away from a provider into Microsoft 365, we can help you do that. Melissa asked, have you heard about Zoom's phone system? I have. We have some clients that use it and that love it. And it seems to, love's a strong word. They like it. It seems to work well. I don't think it's anything special. If you use Zoom, then it can have some benefits, but it's not anything special. So I'll leave it at that. As a solution, it works, but it's nothing unique. And so, yeah, I think let's see here. Any more questions coming in? I think we got it and we're right on time. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We will send out the recording and the presentation. If you have more questions, please schedule a meeting with us, nwtex.com/Microsoft 365. We can dive deep into your situation. We can see if we're the right fit to help be your Microsoft partner or be your MSP, where we can help you manage your technology. And kudos to all of you for hanging out with me for an hour. But long-term, we help our clients not have to do this research themselves, right? If you're on this call and you're like, man, I feel overwhelmed, that's okay. If you're not an IT person or a Microsoft person, you should rely on somebody like us to help you navigate this, right? So we can help you be successful. You can focus on your business, and we can focus on helping you manage and leverage technology. So thanks everyone for joining us. Really enjoyed spending time with you all. Thanks for all the great questions and interaction. Look out for an email from us in the next day or two with all the information. Have a great day. Hope this was helpful, and take care.